11.3%. Tom Homan did not slam the table. He did not wave a folder. He did not give the cameras the little explosion Washington television producers had learned to expect whenever two political tribes were placed in the same room. He just read the number. That was worse. The hearing chamber had been loud 30 seconds earlier. Staffers were whispering. Reporters were arranging laptops.
Members were performing that strange Capitol Hill ritual in which everybody pretends to be too important to notice the cameras while constantly checking where the cameras are. Then the number landed. Hakeem Jeffries looked up from his notes. Nancy Pelosi stopped turning a page. Behind Homan, the screen illuminated. 11.3%. Underneath it appeared a second line. Proposed tax levy increase. Jeffries leaned toward his microphone.
Mr. Homan, I know how this game works. You place a large number on a screen, you pause dramatically, and you count on people watching at home to assume that whatever comes next must be connected to whatever came before. But municipal budgets are not television props. Cities pay police officers, they pay firefighters, they repair roads, they fund public services, they carry labor costs, pension obligations, healthcare costs, and inflation, just like every family and business in America. So, if your argument today is that the existence of a tax increase proves corruption, say it clearly, so we can deal with the claim rather than the theater. Homan let Jeffries finish. That was the first difference between this hearing and the usual congressional food fight. Nobody had been interrupted. Nobody had been rescued from his own argument. Homan looked at the screen once, then back across the room. My argument is not that a tax increase proves corruption. My argument is that the taxpayer is always expected to understand complexity when government loses money, but government suddenly becomes very simple when it needs more money from the taxpayer. When fraud happens, Americans are told there were 14 programs, multiple agencies, overlapping jurisdictions, complicated eligibility rules, administrative failures, contractors, intermediaries, investigations, reviews, audits, and years of process before anyone can really tell them what happened. But when the bill comes due, suddenly the bureaucracy discovers efficiency. It finds your house, it finds your assessment, it finds your paycheck, it finds the date the payment is due. That's the question I came here to ask. Why is accountability complicated but collection automatic? The room stayed quiet. The screen changed. Approx. $18 billion. 14 programs. Then, importantly, a third line appeared. More than half may have been stolen. That last word mattered. Might, not was, might. The source material described federal prosecutors discussing large multi-year fraud schemes and stated that more than half of roughly $18 billion across 14 programs may have been stolen. It did not establish that the entire $18 billion had disappeared, and it did not establish that the fraud directly caused Minneapolis's proposed tax increase. Jeffries noticed immediately. So let's put precision into the record before the headlines run away from us. You have not established that $18 billion was stolen. You have not established that the fraud cases on that screen caused the tax levy increase on the previous screen. And you have not established that the mayor of Minneapolis raised taxes in order to cover up fraud. Those are three very different propositions, and political media too often smears them together, because outrage performs better than accuracy. If this hearing is truly about accountability, then accountability begins with you describing the evidence honestly. Homan nodded. No irritation, no retreat, just a nod. That's fair. So let's describe it honestly. The material says more than half of roughly $18 billion across 14 programs may have been stolen. It also separately describes a proposed tax levy increase of roughly 11.3%. Those two facts do not prove one caused the other. Now that we've removed the exaggeration, tell me which part becomes reassuring. Is the fraud less serious because I used the word may? Is the tax increase less real because I refuse to pretend I proved causation? I don't need a conspiracy between those two numbers. The taxpayer doesn't need one either. The taxpayer only needs to look at both and ask whether the system is protecting his money with the same energy it uses to collect it. Pelosi leaned closer. She had watched enough hearings to know that momentum is a living thing. If you leave it alone, it chooses a side. Mr. Homan, the problem with your formulation is that it allows you to place any government failure beside any government cost and imply a moral relationship without proving a factual one. You can place fraud beside taxes, crime beside social programs, immigration beside municipal budgets, an old FBI file beside a current election. Then you say, I'm not claiming conspiracy, I'm only asking questions. That is a very convenient method because the accusation travels farther than the disclaimer. Government must investigate fraud. Government must also fund services. Both things can be true. Responsible people do not pretend every dollar spent by government is evidence of waste simply because some criminal stole from a different program. Homan folded his hands. I agree with almost all of that. Pelosi blinked. He continued. Government has legitimate costs. Government has legitimate services. Not every tax is theft. Not every program is fraud. Not every administrative failure is corruption. And not every Democratic official is part of some secret scheme. If that's what you thought I came here to say, you're going to have a disappointing afternoon. I came here to argue something harder to dismiss. Every legitimate program creates a duty to protect the money inside it. Every legitimate exercise of discretion creates a duty to explain the standard. Every legitimate use of government power creates a duty to show who is accountable when that power fails. You don't defend government by pretending those questions are partisan. You defend government by answering them. The screen went dark. Then a video clip began. The mayor's budget remarks, approximately $2.3 billion, a general fund around $753 million, an 11.3% proposed tax levy increase. No ominous music accompanied it, no slow-motion graphics. That was deliberate. The numbers did enough work on their own. When the clip ended, Homan remained silent for several seconds. Then he spoke. Most Americans watching this hearing did not get an 11% raise. A retired couple on a fixed income didn't wake up 11% richer because a city has a shortfall. A family running a small business doesn't get to send its customers a letter saying management made mistakes, criminals stole inventory, costs went up, and therefore everybody who behaved responsibly now owes us more money. Government has powers that businesses do not have. Fine. But power should increase the duty to explain, not eliminate it. If you tell citizens they have to absorb another burden, you should be able to look them in the eye and show them what you did first to stop the money already entrusted to you from being wasted or stolen. Jeffries took his time before responding. He was no longer dismissing the premise. He was narrowing it. That sounds reasonable until we examine what you mean by enforcement. Because enforcement is not simply a question of whether a rule exists. Government chooses priorities every day. Prosecutors choose cases. Police departments allocate resources. Immigration authorities decide where personnel are deployed. Courts consider circumstances. Agencies exercise discretion because a system without discretion is not justice, it is a machine. So when you say government failed because every violation did not produce the maximum consequence, you are smuggling a political preference into the word accountability. You prefer aggressive enforcement. Democrats may prefer targeted enforcement. That difference is not automatically hypocrisy. For the first time that morning, Homan smiled. Not because Jeffries had made a weak argument, because he had made the right one. Now we're finally talking about the real issue. I don't believe every offender belongs in prison. I don't believe every immigration violation requires the same response. I don't believe discretion is corruption. I spent a career around enforcement. Anyone who understands enforcement understands priorities. But discretion without a visible principle becomes favoritism. Mercy without an honest accounting of consequences becomes marketing. And selective outrage without a consistent evidentiary standard becomes politics wearing a badge. A folder appeared on the screen. No name yet, just 4 letters. FB. The atmosphere changed. Pelosi looked toward Homan before she looked at the screen. If you're about to use investigative material to smear a member of Congress who was never charged, I suggest you be extraordinarily precise. Homan looked directly at her. I was hoping you'd say that. The name appeared, Eric Swalwell. Jeffries exhaled. So this is where we're going. Homan opened the folder in front of him. This is where the standard goes. The material we're working from describes FBI records concerning a counterintelligence and campaign finance investigation involving Congressman Eric Swalwell and Christine Fang. It describes allegations involving campaign contributions, referrals for internships, and Fang's suspected connections to Chinese intelligence. It also records something your side should insist that I say out loud. Congressman Swalwell said he cooperated with the FBI, and the material before us does not describe criminal charges against him. Investigation is not conviction, allegation is not proof, cooperation matters, lack of charges matters. I am not asking this room to invent a verdict. The punch never came. That unsettled the room more than a punch would have. Jeffries leaned closer. Then perhaps you can explain why his name is on a giant screen behind you, because you've just made the defense for him. The existence of an investigation does not prove wrongdoing. A foreign national knowing a politician does not prove that politician is compromised. The FBI opening a counterintelligence matter does not give political commentators permission to convert suspicion into guilt. If you accept that, then your entire attempt to turn this into some great hypocrisy story collapses. Homan closed the folder. No. That's where the hypocrisy question begins. Jeffries stared at him. Homan continued, now without looking at his notes. For years, America was told that foreign influence involving a president was too important for partisan restraint. We were told that meetings mattered, contacts mattered, associations mattered, investigative leads mattered, intelligence reporting mattered. The public was told that even where a crime had not been established, scrutiny was necessary because national security was larger than political comfort. Fine. I am not here to erase that standard. I'm here to keep it. If foreign influence is dangerous when Donald Trump's name is on the Chiron, foreign influence is worth examining when a Democrat's name is in an FBI file. Not because the Democrat is guilty, because the standard does not belong to one party. Pelosi shook her head slowly. You are manufacturing equivalence between cases with different facts, different evidence, different investigative histories, and different legal outcomes. Of course, the facts are different. Then the comparison fails. No, the verdict can differ, the standard shouldn't. Pelosi's expression hardened. Homan went on. If the evidence against one person is weak, say it's weak. If the evidence against another is strong, say it's strong. If an investigation produces no charge, say no charge. If an allegation is uncorroborated, say uncorroborated. That's how adults handle evidence. The problem begins when people decide that uncertainty is intolerable when it helps an opponent and suddenly sacred when it protects an ally. Jeffries interrupted only after Homan finished. Republicans do that constantly. Yes. Conservative media does it constantly. Yes. Donald Trump has exaggerated allegations. Yes. Jeffries paused. He had expected resistance. Homan gave him none. Jeffries continued. Then what exactly makes your argument partisan? It isn't supposed to be. Your politics obviously are. Of course they are. Then why should anyone believe you're applying this neutrally? They shouldn't. The room snapped to attention. Homan continued. They should check whether I'm applying it consistently. I don't need you to believe I'm neutral. I'm not. You aren't either. Speaker Pelosi isn't. The press isn't. Voters aren't. Human beings aren't. That's why you build a standard that doesn't depend on purity. Investigation is not conviction. Allegation is not proof. Evidence matters. Apply that to Trump. Apply it to Swalwell. Apply it to every Republican senator and every Democratic congressman who walks through that door. There was no applause. There should not have been. Applause would have made it cheaper. Pelosi stared at the words now appearing behind him. Investigation is not conviction. Allegation is not proof. The standard does not change with the name. Jeffries spoke again. That sounds attractive in the abstract, but politics does not happen in the abstract. Context matters. Intent matters. The strength of evidence matters. History matters. And the people most loudly demanding a single standard are usually the first people to complain when that standard is applied to them. Homan nodded. Exactly. Jeffries stopped. Homan leaned forward. That's why I'm not asking for a standard I control. I'm asking for one strong enough that I'd accept it when you control the committee. That line changed the room, not because it solved anything, because it removed the easiest escape. The screen changed again. This time there was no politician's face. No FBI seal, only legal language. Low-level theft, diversion, poverty, no felonies. Jeffries saw the pivot coming and seized it first. Before you turn this into another slogan, let's make the policy clear. Diversion is not legalization. A program that allows low-level offenders to avoid traditional prosecution under certain circumstances is not the same as telling people they are free to steal. Courts already use diversion in drug cases. Mental health courts exist. Prosecutorial discretion exists. Poverty can be relevant to why someone commits a low-level offense. If you want to debate whether a specific policy is wise, debate it. But don't insult the public by pretending a diversion program means politicians declared theft legal. The source itself described the proposal in terms of low-level theft, no felonies, and diversion for offenses connected to poverty. Homan looked at the screen. You're right about the caricature. Diversion is not legalization. Low-level theft is not the same as armed robbery. Poverty can matter. Addiction can matter. Mental illness can matter. A first-time offender stealing food is not morally identical to an organized crew stealing thousands of dollars in merchandise. If conservative media flattens all of that into Democrats' legalized theft, then conservative media is being lazy. Pelosi leaned back. That's an unusual admission. No, it's an admission that makes the real argument harder for you. The screen changed to a simple image. A shelf, an empty space where inventory had been. Homan continued. Now that we remove the straw man, let's talk about the part politicians prefer to hide. The item is still gone, the business still paid for it, the employee still has to deal with the incident. Security still costs money, insurance still costs money. Loss prevention still costs money. At some point, those costs enter prices, staffing decisions, insurance premiums, store locations, or profit margins. Compassion toward an offender may be justified, but compassion is not free. Somebody absorbs the consequence. Jeffries answered with a longer breath. That is true of every criminal justice decision. Incarceration also costs money. Prosecution costs money. Jail costs money. Police costs money. A teenager who receives a criminal record may lose access to employment and become more likely to offend again. A smart justice system measures downstream costs on every side. So if you're going to talk about the hidden bill of diversion, then talk about the hidden bill of punishment too. Otherwise, you're not doing accounting. You're choosing which costs deserve to be visible. This time, Homan did not answer immediately. The narrator would have loved a clever line there. But clever lines are often where serious arguments go to die. Homan looked down at the policy text, then back up. That's fair too. Jail has a cost. Prosecution has a cost. A permanent record has a cost. Bad enforcement policy can create more problems than it solves. So the real argument is not mercy versus cruelty. The real argument is whether politicians tell the public the full price of the choice they're making. If diversion is cheaper and produces less recidivism, show it. If prosecution protects businesses better, show it. If poverty changes what justice should look like, explain the threshold. What I reject is a political language where every cost imposed in the name of compassion becomes invisible because acknowledging the cost might complicate the slogan. Pelosi watched him carefully now. She had stopped trying to force him into the position of maximum punishment, so she moved to something larger. Your entire hearing rests on the assumption that government owes the public perfect transparency. It does not. Intelligence work cannot be fully public. Criminal investigations cannot be fully public. Presidential deliberations cannot be fully public. Negotiations cannot be fully public. Some secrecy is necessary to govern. Homan looked toward the final folder. You're right. Pelosi's eyes followed his. He opened it, which brings us to the presidency. The screen turned black, then a single sentence appeared. Who was making the decisions? Nobody smiled now. Jeffries moved first. If you're about to repeat the fiction that Joe Biden was not president, understand that advisors advising a president is not evidence of a shadow government. I agree. Chiefs of staff control access. Yes. Senior advisors shape policy. Yes. Cabinet secretaries exercise delegated authority. Yes. First families influence presidents. Yes. Every modern White House operates through a network of people around the president. Yes. Jeffries spread his hands. Then what is left? Homan looked toward the screen. Degree. The interview excerpt began. A tight group of advisors. Mike Donnellan, Steve Ricchetti, Ron Klein, Anita Dunn, Anthony Brunel, Agne Tomasini. The discussion described a circle around Biden that, according to people interviewed for the reporting, exercised unusual influence. It included the description that Biden was increasingly being cordoned off in 2023 and 2024, and that some cabinet officials portrayed him less as a solitary executive and more as the senior member of a board. When the clip ended, Pelosi spoke with the confidence of someone who had found solid ground. Nothing you just played proves that an advisor unlawfully exercised presidential power. Nothing proves an executive order was forged. Nothing proves a pardon was issued without authorization. Nothing proves that the constitutional chain of command ceased to exist. Senior advisors having unusual influence may be politically interesting. It is not evidence that anyone stole the presidency. If you are going to imply that, then produce the evidence. Homan nodded once. You're right. A faint murmur. Pelosi continued. Then perhaps this final accusation ends where the others did. No. Homan looked across the room. You just answered a criminal question. What? I asked a Democratic one. Pelosi's expression narrowed. What Democratic question? How much decision-making can move away from the person voters elected before voters deserve to know? Jeffries intervened. That is an impossible standard. Presidents are not solitary kings. Government is delegation. If the president asks an advisor to negotiate, that advisor acts. If the president trusts a chief of staff to filter information, that chief of staff acts. If a cabinet secretary carries out policy, that secretary acts. You cannot measure presidential power by counting how many sentences came directly from the president's mouth. I agree. Then what exactly do you want? Clarity about the boundary? What boundary? Advice and substitution. Jeffries leaned back. Homan continued. I am not claiming this source proves unlawful substitution. It doesn't. I'm saying the reporting raises a legitimate question about how much influence a small group accumulated around a president whose capacity was itself becoming a public issue. If the answer is that Biden remained fully informed, made the major decisions, authorized the actions, and delegated normally, then put evidence behind that answer. That protects the presidency. If the answer is more complicated, the country deserves to know that too. Transparency isn't an attack on constitutional government. Sometimes it is the only thing that preserves trust in it. Pelosi looked toward him. And what of executive privilege? Protect it where legitimate. National security? Protect it. Medical privacy? Protect it where appropriate. Private presidential deliberations? Protect the parts the law protects. Pelosi shook her head. You want all the advantages of disclosure with none of the costs. No. Homan's tone changed. It became less prosecutorial, more tired, almost conversational. I want Washington to stop pretending the only choices are total secrecy or total exposure. We know how oversight works. We know how classified briefings work. We know how closed sessions work. We know how to protect sources, methods, privilege, and sensitive information while still establishing who exercised authority. Congress does it when Congress wants to do it. That last sentence did not need decoration. Everybody in the room understood it. The screen behind Homan suddenly filled with everything that had been shown during the hearing. 11.3%. Approximately $18 billion across 14 programs. FBI records. Low-level theft and diversion. Who was making the decisions? Jeffries looked at it for several seconds. Then he turned back to Homan. That screen is the problem with your entire presentation. You have constructed a collage, tax policy, fraud, a counterintelligence investigation, criminal diversion, presidential advisors. Those are not one story. They involve different governments, different laws, different people, different evidence, and different standards of proof. You keep arranging them visually until the audience feels a pattern that you have not actually demonstrated. That may be effective radio. It is not necessarily sound analysis. Homan listened to every word. When Jeffries finished, he did something no one expected. He agreed again. You're right that they're different stories. Jeffries waited. Homan continued. I don't believe one conspiracy connects them. I haven't shown one. I haven't shown a secret Democratic meeting where somebody ordered cities to tolerate fraud, prosecutors to ignore theft, investigators to protect politicians, and White House aides to seize presidential authority. That would be an extraordinary allegation, and the source material doesn't prove it. The screen began to clear, one item at a time. The tax number disappeared. The fraud number disappeared. The FBI heading disappeared. The theft policy disappeared. Only one phrase remained. Who answers? Homan pointed toward it. That's the connection. Jeffries stared. Homan's voice stayed controlled. When public money disappears, who answers? When taxes rise, who explains the trade-off? When a foreign influence allegation appears, who decides whether the standard changes with the party? When a justice policy shifts consequences away from one person and onto another, who accounts for the cost? When a small group around a president gains unusual influence, who shows the public where advice ended and authority began? He paused. I don't need one conspiracy. I need one principle. Power requires accountability. The hearing recessed. By the time everyone returned, the cameras had multiplied. Washington reporters know when a hearing is producing more than clips. They know when it is producing a frame, and frames are dangerous. Facts can be disputed. A frame tells people which facts belong in the same room. Jeffries returned with the cleanest counterattack he had left. Let's test your principle against your own side. Republican administrations waste money. Republican governors make bad decisions. Republican politicians exaggerate. Conservative media turns allegations into verdicts. Donald Trump has made claims that exceeded the evidence available at the time. If accountability is universal, then your own political allies belong under the same microscope. Homan nodded. Yes. No speech, just yes. Jeffries continued. Then say it fully. Homan sat forward. If a Republican administration loses billions through preventable fraud, investigate it. If a Republican official takes foreign money illegally, prosecute it. If a conservative commentator turns an allegation into a conviction without evidence, call it out. If Donald Trump makes a factual claim, test the claim. If somebody in his administration exercises authority they were not legally given, investigate that too. I don't need a Republican exemption to defend a standard. In fact, the moment I ask for one, the standard becomes worthless. Jeffries watched him. Then why spend this hearing focused on Democrats? Homan looked toward Pelosi, then back toward Jeffries. Because you're the people sitting across from me today. A few people laughed. Homan did not. And because political hypocrisy becomes easiest to see when people are forced to live under the principles they demanded for somebody else, that is not uniquely democratic. Republicans do it, media figures do it, presidents do it, Congress does it, human beings do it. But if you spent years insisting foreign influence required scrutiny, you should not suddenly discover nuance when the politician is yours. If you demand taxpayers sacrifice for public programs, you should treat fraud as an assault on those same taxpayers. If you defend discretion in criminal justice, explain the cost instead of pretending cost disappears. If you defend a president's use of advisors, show where legitimate delegation ends. Pelosi adjusted the folder in front of her. You have built yourself a standard so broad that no reasonable person can disagree with it. Homan looked at her. Good? That means it proves very little. No. It proves whether people are willing to use it when it hurts. The screen changed one final time. 3 to 4 points. Jeffries looked up and almost smiled. There it is. Homan waited. The election. Yes. So after all this talk about neutral standards, we finally reached the campaign. We reached the voter. The source material had opened with analysis suggesting that under the described district lines, Democrats could need a national House popular vote margin of roughly 3 to 4 points to retake control. Jeffries turned toward Homan. Redistricting is structural. A party needing a larger national margin under a particular map does not prove voters embraced your philosophy. It does not prove Democrats rejected theirs. It does not prove some great moral awakening. Elections involve candidates, districts, turnout, geography, economics, and dozens of other variables. If you convert a map analysis into a referendum on everything you've said today, you're doing exactly what you accused others of doing. Homan listened. Then he slowly pushed the microphone forward. I don't know what voters are going to do. Jeffries waited. I don't know if they will reward Republicans. Another pause. I don't know if they will punish Democrats. Pelosi watched him. I don't know whether they agree with me. Homan pointed toward the number. That's why they're voters. The room became very quiet. My argument is not that this number proves we're right. My argument is that eventually every argument in this room leaves the room. It goes home. It lands on a kitchen table. It shows up in a tax bill. It appears in a grocery price. It becomes a question about whether a neighborhood feels safe. It becomes a question about whether people trust an investigation. It becomes a question about whether they believe the person they elected was actually exercising the authority they gave him. Then citizens decide. Jeffries responded more quietly now, and they may reject everything you've argued. Absolutely. They may decide Democrats have better answers. Absolutely. They may decide Republicans are hypocrites too. They should look. They may decide Trump is wrong. They get to. Pelosi looked toward the screen. Then perhaps the country does not need this performance. Homan shook his head. The country needs fewer performances. On that we agree. And more records. Pelosi almost smiled. Of course you had to add that. Couldn't help myself. For the first time all day, the hostility loosened, only slightly. Then Homan looked back toward the first sheet of paper. The one containing the number that had started the hearing, 11.3%. He picked it up. When government makes a mistake, it asks citizens for patience. He placed the sheet beside the fraud folder. When government investigates itself, it asks citizens to wait for the process. Beside that went the FBI material. When politicians face allegations, they ask citizens to respect nuance. Then, the criminal justice policy. When policy produces trade-offs, they ask citizens to understand complexity. Finally, the White House folder. When questions reach the center of power, they ask citizens not to jump to conclusions. He looked across the table. Fina, no jumping, no invented guilt, no invented conspiracies, no $18 billion headline when the record says more than half may have been stolen. No calling diversion legalization when it isn't. No calling advisors a shadow government unless the evidence proves unlawful authority. No calling an investigation a conviction. Pelosi watched him. Jeffries did not move. Homan continued. But after we remove every exaggeration, every slogan, every partisan shortcut, something still remains. He held up the tax page. The bill, then the FBI folder, the standard, then the White House file, the power. He laid them down. Who pays? Who gets scrutinized? Who decides? And who answers when it goes wrong? Jeffries leaned toward his microphone for the final time. You have spent an entire hearing trying to prove that Washington gives itself exemptions. Homan looked at him. Yes. And your solution is what? Homan did not answer immediately. The cameras waited. The room waited. Even Pelosi waited. Then he spoke. Build the rules strong enough that you would trust your enemy to enforce it. Jeffries' face changed. Only slightly. That was enough. Homan continued. If you're a Democrat, build the investigative standard strong enough that you'd accept it under a Republican Justice Department. If you're a Republican, build it strong enough that you'd accept it under a Democratic one. If you defend surveillance, Imagine your opponent holding the warrant. If you defend prosecutorial discretion, imagine your opponent choosing who gets discretion. If you defend executive secrecy, imagine the other party controlling the White House. If you defend congressional subpoenas, imagine your own records sitting on the other side of one. He leaned back. That's how you know whether you believe in a principle. Pelosi closed her folder. Or whether you believe in power. Homan looked at her. Exactly. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. That was the strange thing about Washington. The loudest rooms often reveal the least. But every once in a while, after all the talking has burned itself out, a quiet room tells you exactly where the argument ended. The clerk began collecting documents. The photographers lowered their cameras. The graphic behind the witness table faded to black. Then 3 lines appeared. Same law, same facts, same standard. Jeffries looked at him. You don't get to decide what the country believes. Homan stood. No. Neither does Donald Trump. No. Neither does Nancy Pelosi. No. Neither do I. No. Jeffries looked toward the cameras. Then who does? Homan picked up the 11.3% sheet and slipped it back into the folder. The people who keep getting the bill. He walked away from the microphone, and for once, nobody in Washington had another speech ready.